Welcome to Sartor TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have Howard Belk join us today. Howard is co-CEO and Chief Creative Officer of the global brand strategy and design firm Siegel and Gale. He's got over 25 years of experience. He serves on several boards and has published several essays and commentary, and he's here to tell us more. Howard, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here.
So you've been working with Siegel and Gale for about 13 years, and today you're co-CEO and Chief Creative Officer. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, my job right now is the best possible job. It's just that blend of kind of running the business but being involved in the ideas and the creative aspects of what we do, which is really impactful work for very large companies. It's really the best, that blend of strategy and creative. I got here through a pretty interesting journey. I came up as a designer, as a creative. I founded a company when I was 28 with my best friend, and we built a really nice company over the next 12 years or so that Omnicom, who was our parent company and one of the largest marketing services companies in the world, they bought us in kind of two stages in 1999 and 2001. So that was a kind of transformational event, and I've been with Omnicom at a couple different companies ever since. That happened right around the time of the dot-com explosion, which was a really interesting time, and it caused a lot of creative destruction. So our company that had been bought sort of merged with another company and then yet another company. And so I was kind of on that journey running the company through that time. And it was almost like going to business school, just dealing with all that carnage and havoc and at the same time trying to do great work for great clients. Out of that, I became part of another Omnicom company and ran a big part of that business for a little while, ran their San Francisco office, commuting back and forth from New York. But in 2004, I joined Siegel and Gale as Chief Creative Officer. And I was really excited about that, working for Alan Siegel, who's one of the giants of the branding world, really has been a transformational force. And I've been with Siegel and Gale ever since, Chief Creative Officer, and then with my very, very good friend David Seriri, we got named co-heads of the New York office, which is the flagship office, and then not too long after that, co-presidents, and then Alan appointed us co-CEOs in 2010. And a couple of years later, he stepped down and is now chairman emeritus. And David and I have been running the company ever since, and I've kept that chief creative officer role to stay close to the work, stay close to the people, and be involved in the things I love.
Very interesting journey. What was it like being an entrepreneur? What are some of the lessons that you learned that you're able to sort of apply today?
Oh heavens, I learned so much. Because really, I've been sort of running a company more or less non-stops, for 30 years. So you learn a lot, and so dealing with scale, dealing with clients, dealing with talent. When not long after I founded that company, the Mac, really exploded onto the creative scene. So dealing with technology changes, all those lessons are still things that are really important issues today.
Tell us a little bit about Siegel and Gale. What's the company about? What's its vision and its mission?
Siegel and Gale is the simplicity company. So in the branding space, we're blessed with a really clear philosophy about what we think is important, how we do things. And it even leads to the kind of assignments we're asked to take on, which are usually, really complicated brand issues for large companies most of the time, although the last few years we've gotten involved in some really exciting startups and what we call 21C companies, sort of companies of the 21st century, like Blue Apron, for example, or Birchbox, or other kinds of really interesting digitally enabled startups. So Siegel and Gale, we study simplicity. We sort of embrace it in our processes and in the client experiences we're trying to create for the folks that hire us, and absolutely in our solutions.
What does simplicity look like when it comes to branding? How does it come to life?
We describe simplicity as the intersection of clarity and surprise. So think about a customer experience where you're buying something, whether you're getting on an airplane, whether you're working with some kind of electronic device, trying to buy something online, and it's completely intuitive how you go about doing it, and it's so clear that it's actually enjoyable. And often it'll be the first time you had that experience within that category, and so that's where the surprise comes in, like, why isn't everybody doing it just like this? And that breeds, a fantastic customer experience. It breeds loyalty, and you start proselytizing about that experience to your friends. So you get a kind of a brand advocacy, which is the holy grail of brand building.
You also conduct the Global Brand Simplicity Index every year. Tell us what some of your findings have been.
I think it's both of those things, a movement and a result of a lot of frustration or confusion on the part of customers, because they have so many choices right now about how they do anything, So I love it. I love that so many client-side companies are embracing simplicity as something that's a differentiator for them. And I think it's a really winning formula. In fact, we field the Global Brand Simplicity Index every year. We've done it for 8-9 years, in which we poll over 10,000 consumers around the world on what are the brands in so it'll be geographically oriented. So if you're in China, what are the top 100 brands there? We'll go and ask people, what are your experiences like in these different categories or business verticals? And they rank them on the simplest brands to buy, to use, to understand. And one of the things, we find things, apart from that ranking, really interesting things every year when people start to talk about those brands they love and those brands that frustrate them. And so that companies, products, brands that embrace simplicity, they see incredible customer loyalty. They actually see pricing power. Like we've quantified how much money is left on the table in any given industry by the leaders if they could only make their products simpler, and it's billions and billions of dollars. And we also see profits increase. If it's simpler to use your products, people are going to buy them more often. If you bring simplicity into your company and make innovating simpler, make the approval process, the collaboration process, all those kind of things simpler to do within your own company, you're going to see productivity explode. If you take out complexity from your client relationships, so your client service calls drop because people aren't confused about a product, about the costs, about the service, you see cost savings. So what does that all mean? It means you become more profitable. So for public companies, what does that mean? It means your stock price goes up. So we've charted the most simple public companies since we've started the survey 9 years ago or 8 years ago. And what we've seen their stock price do is crush every single major stock market index around the world in up years and down years. So tough years like 2009, 10, 11, the simplest companies outperformed, S&P 500, the DAX, et cetera, massively. Those are in down years. In up years, it's even more so. Google, for example, Apple, for example, McDonald's, in Europe, Aldi, which is a shopping store. All of these and others have done very, very well.
Can you give us an example of some of the work that you're doing with your clients around this?
We get hired when companies kind of are at a moment of truth. Perhaps they've acquired another major company, or they're about to split into two, or they are facing real market disruption. And often, let's take the examples of mergers and acquisitions. Suddenly, you put together two companies. Well, a whole bunch of things change. You might have twice as many products. You have two stories that you need to mold into one story. So simplifying all that so that employees know what we're about, what do we do, why are we doing it, how are we different, why should people care about us in this new form, that becomes very important. And if you've got a product portfolio that went from 2,000 products to 6,000 products or something like that, Well, how does the outside world even know where to go? You know, how do they negotiate all that complexity? Those kind of things are where this, you know, skill with simplifying things becomes very valuable.
What elements, what branding elements should organizations and leaders consider in a merger or an acquisition type situation?
Well, in a merger situation or an acquisition situation, what's really important for the CEO is to tell a really clear, simple, and powerful story. Why are these two companies better together? What is the story of this new company? What is it that we're bringing customers that's valuable, that's different, that they can't get anywhere else? And then for our employees, why are we working so hard on, you know, on that particular endeavor? How are we impacting the world? So a CEO having that kind of platform is critical. If they don't, then everybody's saying, why did we do this? Who is benefiting from it? So that's one thing that's that's a really important issue. Your brand platform. What do we do? Why do we do it? How do we do it? How do we talk about it? Beyond that, you get into the issue of brand architecture. So we had 2,000 products, now we have 4,000 products. You know, we had these business units, suddenly a couple more are part of our story. How do people negotiate them? So brand architecture deals precisely with that, organizing products, categories, and business units. And how do they work together better? That falls in the category of innovation. Your brand story should make clear, how do we innovate? And a lot of the times, you know, growth in a merger or acquisition situation is going to come from synergies that customers actually need to be able to go to one source for this range of products or solutions or things like that. How are we going to innovate to make sure they work better together? So that's almost like a roadmap, and that can come out of that brand development process in a merger and acquisition.
So then, how do you make sure that you're aligning your brand strategy with the overall business strategy and some of the marketing activities that need to go along with that?
Business strategy has to drive brand strategy. The brand and how it's developed and how you execute upon it should be furthering the business strategy. So, you know, a business strategy, what's that going to entail? Where are we going to grow? What kind of customers are most valuable to us? Which are the ones we need to go get? That brand strategy should support communications and customer experiences and things like that that'll make that, that business strategy much more likely to succeed. Sure. Yeah. So for example, you know, the cloud is a huge phenomenon, and a lot of companies are dealing with how's that going to change our business? What kind of opportunities does that create for us? Let's say we've had a business that is largely based on resident technology systems, on-premise server systems. But our future is going to be cloud-based entrepreneurs. We need to reach those people. We need them to believe that we can pivot and serve them well. So your brand strategy should support that business strategy.
Now, what about global organizations? How important is it to consider brand and how brand might be relevant across different geographies and different, you know, boundaries? Is that something that's considered?
Well, we're frequently engaged by large global organizations like SAP or HP or telecoms or what have you. And they're looking for a value proposition that will be resonant around the world in very, very different cultures. So thinking that through from a value proposition, a story, a brand voice becomes very important, so that you have a really consistent set of expectations around the world that you can actually deliver upon. The other thing that becomes very important for global organizations is what seems like a tactical issue, execution. So you can come up with a great strategy, but if it's executed upon, if it's delivered to customers in an inconsistent way around the world, suddenly that can create a big problem for you. Or if the timing isn't really well considered, you can have a key market lagging behind the story. So It's a strategy that will be powerful and compelling in many different cultures, and it's an execution plan that it gets it out there all in a very simultaneous way.
You've also done some research on disruptive organizations, one of them the Dollar Shave Club, some others. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about why these companies are considered disruptive, and what are some other industries that you feel are ripe for disruption?
One of the areas we have focused on the last few years with our Global Brand Simplicity Index is these startup disruptive brands, and measuring which ones of those are emerging on consumers' consciousness, let's say, in a real big way. And there's been some really interesting ones. And what's also interesting is how they sort of evolve from startup disruptor to something that's status quo. One of the things that we've seen about how it happens is you get a disruptor. The most successful ones start with price. They completely disrupt the price structure of a category, which is what Dollar Shave Club did. That then gets the attention of customers. If something is a fraction of the cost they've been paying for, they're going to give it a try. And if they have a good customer experience, suddenly you're going to hockey stick your customer acquisition. Then what happens is you get the incumbent playing defense. And they typically don't play defense well. They deny reality, they're very slow, they start to copy the disruptor, but there's a credibility gap in the way that they do that, so they are on their back foot, and it's a pretty rare occasion where they can take the take the initiative again. So that's what we see with the disruptor, sort of world. And what's interesting about that is how do you create a brand story, execute at the speed that disruptor is moving at, which is always going to be very, very, very fast, and how do you build in the capability to scale with them in terms of the brand touch points and things like that.
Can you provide an example of an organization that might have a great product or service, but might be impacted because they don't have their branding and their messaging and their advertising done right?
I'm not sure whether it's branding or design right, but what's really important for these disruptors is to keep up with the marketplace, because it's so many of them are operating in the digital mobile arena, which is so fast moving, and there's so many new entrants, so many new competitors. So if they can't keep up with what's really valuable to their customers, they can get outflanked. And sometimes, what's valuable changes. One that comes to mind is Monster.com, which was a powerhouse in talent, in search and job placement and things like that. But what's happened over the last few years is LinkedIn sort of emerged and captured the zeitgeist and brought a completely new offering, let's say, into that experience, which was content, and which was a platform for talent to really express themselves and to demonstrate that they were with it, that they had a really strong point of view. They enabled the whole sort of networking and sharing, and they've really hurt Monster.com. So the Monster.com look and feel was really distinctive when it emerged, and they kept it fresh. And we even helped them with that. However, what they've really struggled with is sort of how the whole process of search and networking and career management has evolved. So that can happen. I mean, a company that's interesting to look at that was a disruptor is Facebook. And I think Facebook has done a very good job of keeping up with how people create community and what they're about. And so what I see right now is them saying, you know what? Strong communities can't live just online. I mean, that's sort of half your life. So now they're doing work around groups and other things to facilitate real-world engagement and things like that. And they're weaving that into their mission in some really interesting ways. So I think those disruptors can't rest on their laurels. They need to keep innovating in terms of their mission, how they serve it, and incorporating new technologies every step of the way.
So what other industries do you feel are ripe for disruption?
a hallmark of industries that are ready for disruption are areas where there's underutilized talent, right? People want to be busy, they want to work. So if you've got, let's say, the professional services arena, if you've got real talent that has blocks of time that's available and they want to apply themselves and they want to augment their salaries, that's a place where if somebody can create a platform and become an intermediary for them and bring together buyers and sellers, you could see disruption. So the legal field, that could be an area where people can buy legal services through a digital platform. Healthcare is really interesting. You know, there's kind of two levels of healthcare. There's critical care, so that's got a pretty deep and wide moat around it. But more mundane care, that could be intermediated. I mean, you could, you know, need a flu shot, you could have some kind of minor injury and look, you know, nearby you for a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. So that's an area that could be disrupted, let's say. Energy, perhaps, you know, as people start using solar panels and technology evolves so they can store energy. You could imagine some kind of marketplace for energy. So I mean, I think we'll be surprised by the areas that get disrupted, but it's definitely going to happen.
I know you had mentioned design, and I want to talk a little bit about design. The importance of design, if you can explain that, and how it fits into this whole notion of simplicity.
You know, there's different ways to think about a brand. Here's an interesting way. A brand is a narrative and an aesthetic. It's a story that's delivered in a way that is, you know, delightful, beautiful, consistent, surprising, and that goes from graphics to created experiences, managed experiences. So, you know, design in that world becomes very, very important. Another area where design is really important is in interface. You know, you could make a case that the most prominent or visible aspect of the Apple design aesthetic is not the iPhone, is not the aluminum cases on their MacBooks and things like that, but it's the interface. There's a very distinctive and proprietary look to that interface, whether you are engaging with your phone, whether you're, you know, in some of their systems on one of their Macs, whether you're buying music or what have you. So I think that's an area where design is critical to not only create simple, clear, intuitive interfaces, but to say, geez, people are going to engage with this company or product in a lot of different media. How can we create a really consistent, proprietary, delightful interface for them?
The success of so many logos that we see out there. So McDonald's comes to mind, right? You know, somebody who doesn't even read sees the M and knows it's McDonald's. What do you think makes a certain logo so successful?
I think logos need to tell stories, you know, so they need to support that brand story. You need to be able to look at it, and without somebody whispering in your ear over your shoulder, oh, what that really means is this, you need to be able to see at least part of a story in there. I think there needs to be some kind of humanity in that logo. You need to see a human hand, or it needs to reference some part of life, and maybe it's the way that story connects with your personal experience. The other thing that you know, makes for really powerful logos is exposure. You know, where are people going to see them? And that's really interesting because if, you know, one of our clients is CVS Health, and we help them move to a heart as a logo. The notion behind that is health is everything. It's the most important thing, and they deliver it from the heart. They're that kind of organization. The heart, though, is a ubiquitous symbol. So how could CVS own that very simple, powerful symbol? Well, what we help them realize is that they are a massive publisher, not just an advertiser, but, you know, they've got over 5,000 stores, you know, all across this country that millions and millions and millions of people are walking in every single day. So if they can expose them to that narrative story connected to that heart, you're going to have a really successful logo launch. And that's exactly what happened. And if you can own a symbol as simple as a heart, or as the McDonald Golden Arch is, or the Target, or the Apple, that's a really powerful brand asset. But what's important to remember is the logo is only part of the story. When you think about, the visual representation of a brand or how it's telling its story, I liken the logo to the keystone in a bridge. And the whole brand experience gets people from here to here, and the logo is just one central part of it.
People are also becoming more vocal about organizations becoming more socially responsive, being more socially responsive, and that is having an impact on brands and organizations. Tell us how that's happening and how organizations can be more proactive about this.
I think more than ever, consumers and customers are going to be looking at companies and the brands that they patronize from a behavioral perspective. And what's interesting right now is we've got a situation where the government is pulling back from involvement in certain parts of our lives, environmental, for example, or other kinds of things. And I think consumers, we're going to see them, we already are, looking at corporate America to fill that gap. So it's a huge responsibility and an opportunity for companies to align themselves around issues that touch people's lives that are really important, that are aligned with what they're about, and support them. So you see companies like Starbucks doing it with hiring the military and their practices around growers and how they source their products and things like that. It's huge. You see other companies really stumble because of conditions in their factories and things like that are out of alignment with the value system that's here in this country, and they get in trouble. We've seen it time and time again. It's a responsibility for sort of iconic societal brands that they ought to be taking on. Alignment is very, very important. And you can see it really help brands, and you can see it really give them a black eye. So, we've had this recent ban on travel, or it's being forced through the courts. We'll see how that goes. And you saw, the CEO of Uber, who's got all kinds of problems, but he was part of that group that ostensibly is supporting that kind of a ban. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of his drivers are from countries that could be impacted from that. So that was completely out of alignment from what that company's all about and the values of their workforce. And so, he sort of withdrew, somewhat embarrassed. You'll see, on the other hand, Elon Musk or Robert Iger from Tesla and Disney saying, we support the Paris Accords, and we're a company that is all about the environment and realize that it has long-term importance, and we're not climate deniers and things like that. So they withdraw from the business roundtable, and it's very, very good for their brand. So it's a really important topic. It's not going to go away. And societal brands, big brands that everybody's aware of, they need to own that and figure out where are we going to stand on which issues. And if there's not alignment, stay away.
What do you think is causing this? Why do you think consumers are demanding organizations to be more socially responsive in a way maybe they weren't in previous years?
Well, I think one of the things that causes consumers to care and act on their assessment of what companies do is, one thing is they see government taking less and less a role. Another is that the costs of inaction are much more visible because of the coverage that they get, both in sort of the established media but on social media. So I think there's a much higher awareness of the issues themselves and the costs of ignoring them, and they want somebody to be doing something about it. Often they want to do it themselves, so they're looking for a channel through which they can indirectly impact the environment or culture or other things that are very, very important to them.
What kind of impact has social media had on branding and advertising and the marketing industry?
Social media is, having an enormous impact on marketing, brands, products, the way consumers engage with them, and sort of in very different ways. One thing is, companies, let's say, no longer own their brands entirely, because their consumers who feel a strong affinity and almost an ownership for that brand, they can make their voices heard in very, very powerful and immediate ways, and they can win a lot of support very, very quickly. So that's one impact of social media. Another is it's fueling a data explosion. So savvy brands and brands that are technologically advanced, they can know much more about their consumers, what they care about, sort of what are the dynamics of their transaction habits and tendencies, what are their feelings around culture and behavioral norms. And if they can put that data together in really smart ways, it can inform how they serve them, how they develop products, where they expose them to the products, and things like that. So it's having a huge impact on marketers' ability to get their products in front of people at the right time and right moment. In lots of ways. It's a great opportunity. Here's another way. If you look at what people do with social media, one of the things they do is they share. And they share different kinds of moments on these platforms that can get enormous exposure. If you can, through your customer experience or through some of your marketing strategies, make it very easy for them to share great experiences with your brand, suddenly your outreach is exponentially increased. So that's a huge opportunity for brands. Let's say it's some kind of retail brand. They're trying to get people into their stores. If they can create some moment in that store where a mother and a child have a great moment, or the child alone does, or somebody does, and they make it really easy for that to be photographed and documented and shared across that person's social networks that are then reshared, and that happens, hundreds of thousands of times, that's huge. So there's really interesting opportunities there.
What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing today?
One of the biggest challenges is how to deal with data. And that leads to how do we take all this data and all these insights and turn it into a brief that writers and designers can execute upon, where they can create advertising, experiences, things like that, that will be very, very effective. So what it involves is, collecting behavioral data, transactional data, cultural data, and turning that into some kind of a brief that they can execute upon. Not too many people have cracked that code. So that's a big challenge. For those that do, it's huge. Suddenly you know what my customers care about, the kind of things they're doing, when do they buy my products or products like mine, and I can sort of have that kind of conversation with them in a connected way across all the different touch points and media that they're consuming. That's a big challenge and a big opportunity.
I think this is an issue that many organizations are facing. Is there ever a fear in the industry that every organization can become a marketing and advertising organization in itself?
Some of them are. They have to commit to it. So I see companies like Google that has a tremendous in-house design capability. Apple might have 1,000 creative people working for it. IBM is going that way too, building great big design studios. Johnson & Johnson has had one for a long time. But the thing about those companies is they have a really clear brand idea. They're investing a lot of money into that capability with a long-term view. And they have the resources to do it. So those companies are going to do it, and they're going to be very successful. That's hard to replicate it's hard to attract the talent, it's hard to have the funding, it's hard to have the will to stick with it. So I don't see that as a big, widespread threat to creative firms, but I do think it's going to happen, and it's something of a threat. Not only because there may be fewer assignments, but also they become attractive to the talent. So a company like Google can attract great talent. Apple can attract great talent. So suddenly they're entering the talent wars with us, and that could be one of the places where we're hurt the most.
Another thing that we've been seeing a lot of is how organizations are starting to object or more to where their ads get placed in terms of content, objectionable content, especially when it comes to digital advertising. Has this always been the case, or is this more of a phenomenon with digital advertising? And how much of it really does impact their brands?
I think this issue of advertising appearing in places that are at odds with the values of the advertiser is a relatively new phenomenon, and it's largely driven by programmatic media placement, where you've got ads being placed instantaneously on thousands and thousands of platforms, and there's very little control over that because it's an algorithm driving it. So I think it's a relatively new phenomenon. It's a very big deal for advertisers, and so I know that the media agencies are working on it extremely in an extremely focused way. It's a big issue.
Is this something that's always been the case, where consumers automatically assume that just because an ad is placed near content that they might consider objectionable, that that brand is automatically associated with it? Since when has it been all tied together?
I think this issue has existed before, and I know, for example, back in the days when it was newspaper advertising and things like that, placement next to a feature story that in some way was relevant to that particular ad, and that was a coveted position, and you might pay a premium for that. So it was more the flip side of getting next to the content you really wanted, and there was less of a case of being next to something objectionable. But it happened, but the scale of it happening was far less, and the content was much less objectionable. So now you've got media, a plethora of media platforms that are peddling lies and things that are not true, or things that might be seen as racist or other kinds of things. And so that is a relatively new phenomenon. And we see that. It's like the whole political debate and things like that has gotten so polarized and so nasty. And that's happening on new media platforms that have, sprung up, and mobile and social has allowed them to get viewership at astounding rates. So it was an issue before, but nothing like the scale we see now.
Now, with so many changes that are going on in the industry, all the technology out there, different ways to use data, how are we going to use it? How are you making sure that the people that you hire are keeping up on the skills to make sure that they can do the job?
Yeah. Having the right talent in place has never been more important, because the solutions to today's marketing problems, communication problems, or let's call them marketing opportunities and communications opportunities, they require a broader set of talents and background and capabilities. So you need researchers, you need writers, you need ethnographers, you need different kinds of designers, different kinds of strategists. You need to bring a business perspective to the solutions, because the reason you're working on it is somebody in the C-suite has invited you to the table. So you've got to keep up. So that means we draw talent from a much wider range of sources, different backgrounds, different schools. We get more people, people working for us that have never been in the space before, but they've got really relevant skills and talents and perspective and background and things like that. So, for us, as we grow and as people leave the firm, every single person we bring in, we're looking for their their fluency with these new technologies and things like that. And it really matters for our insights and research group that they are comfortable working with big data, that they're adept at making sense out of enormous amounts of information.
How do you measure the success of your branding and design campaigns?
Right. We're always putting in place metrics for the work that we do, and we gravitate towards what I call customized metrics. And what I mean by that is our work is always commenced with the idea of furthering some kind of business strategy. So that our client's business strategy could be related to customer acquisition. It could be related to cost savings. It could be related to a talent war. It could be related to awareness or cross-selling or lots of different kind of business issues. So we'll put in place metrics that go right after those very things. How are we doing on talent? How are we doing on cross-selling? How are we doing on upselling? How are we doing on reaching our most valuable clients? How are we doing on even identifying? How are we doing on even identifying our most valuable clients? So the metrics can be very, very different. They should be aimed specifically at the business objectives of that client. And we on most big jobs, we will track the stock price too. So we'll take a look at this project commenced, how's the stock price done? And that can come from more customers, better pricing, cost savings, things like that.
When would you ever consider, or when would an organization or you consider a rebranding effort? When would rebranding be necessary for an organization?
It's appropriate for a client to evaluate, is it time for a rebrand, certainly after a merger or an acquisition. If they've had some kind of reputational crisis, if the nature of their business has really, really changed and they're associated with the company they were, not the company they are. Those are times.
What are some of the biggest contributions that Siegel and Gale has made to the industry over the years?
Siegel and Gale was founded in 1969 by Alan Siegel, and since then the branding world has changed, in so many ways, in so many good ways, and it's making a much larger impact on the clients, on the customers, and on our world. And we've kind of led the way, in many dimensions. Firstly, I'd say in naming simplicity as a critical part of brands and how they relate to customers and what customers value and trust. And then developing products and tools and a whole way of seeing the world that supports that. Another one is the whole concept of brand voice. Siegel and Gale invented that term. We actually hold the trademark for it, which is, and what we did was recognize that, the way that a company speaks should be just as recognizable as the way that a person speaks. And so that goes to the things we talk about, how we say them, and the experiences people have. Voice is a lot more than the written word. We were at the forefront of helping companies move into a digital world and say, how does that change our story? How does that change our customer experience? Going all the way back to the 90s, we helped create the Weather Channel. We have a long history of that, and we do it today, where it largely happens in, and I talked about this earlier, how do our digital interfaces and how do the way people engage with us and our products, how does that need to take place in a mobile world, and how can that link directly to our brand story and our brand promise? Fact-based branding. Back in the good old days, people worked a lot from gut. Today, it's possible to get a really strong fact base about how do people make choices, how are we doing in that kind of world, what influences those choices, where are our competitors, where are we, where do we have room and credibility to go out and make a much stronger claim about who we are, what we do, and the benefits we bring. Those are just a few of the areas.
So what advice can you give people who are looking to enter the field of marketing and advertising and branding?
Well, the first thing I'd say to somebody that's thinking about getting into marketing or branding or design or what have you is, I don't think there's ever been a better time. And the reason I say that is that on the client side, there's more and more recognition from the very tops of organizations that brand is, hugely important and a great business lever. So what does that mean? It means we're invited to get involved with projects and assignments and endeavors that are going to have huge impacts on these great big institutions. And that's, for me, that's really, really exciting. I love being able to tell my mother that I'm working on, this brand or that brand, and she's actually heard of them. And we're helping them do something really important. So it's a great time. And my advice is to pay attention. So and what I mean by that is, when you're working on a particular project, it goes certain ways. Clients or CEOs, they want to do it this way versus that way, and sometimes it's not the way you want to do it. Don't just walk away. Figure out why do they want to do that, because you can be sure that they didn't get to that position without being extremely smart and experienced, and they know more about their company than you do. So if you take that approach of always trying to figure out what's underneath this decision, it helps you give better advice the next time around. So I guess that would be my counsel.
All right, Howard. Well, this is great. Thank
Was
you
it
so
good?
much for joining us.
Yeah, good.
Yes,
Thanks
great.
a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.